where the secrets of the heart are written with ink and sealed with scandal. Welcome to channel, The Countess Chronicles.
You know what nobody tells you about powerful men? The ones who seem like they have everything under control, who command respect in every room they enter, who make decisions worth fortunes without breaking a sweat? They're absolutely terrified of you. Yeah, you heard that right. That guy who's been watching you for months, who clearly has interest written all over his face, but won't make a single move. He's not playing games. He's not disinterested. He's paralyzed by how much power you actually have over him. And that secret changes everything you thought you understood about attraction. See, we've been sold this massive lie that confident men pursue what they want without hesitation, that if he's not chasing you, he must not care enough. But here's the revelation that's going to blow your mind. The Duke, one of the most powerful men in London, watched Catherine for months, frozen, while a lower-status rival confidently pursued her. And when she finally smiled at that rival, accepting his attention, that's when everything exploded. The Duke crossed that ballroom like a man possessed and claimed her with words that left no room for mystery. No more, dance with me. But here's where this gets really interesting, and why you need to hear this story right now. This isn't just some fictional romance that has nothing to do with your life. This exact dynamic is playing out in your world today. Maybe with that colleague who stares but never speaks. Maybe with that friend who gets weird when you mention other guys but won't admit his feelings. Maybe with that ex who stalks your Instagram in silence but won't text. You're sitting there thinking you're not enough, not interesting enough, not beautiful enough to inspire action. Meanwhile, he's sitting there thinking he's not enough, terrified that if he makes a move, and it's not perfect, you'll see through his carefully constructed confidence and realize he's just a human being who's completely lost in feelings he can't control. It's the most frustrating loop in modern dating. Both people waiting, both people scared, both people convinced they're the insufficient one, while the other is out of their league. Here's the conflict that's probably destroying your peace right now. You've been told that playing hard to get, making him jealous, using other guys to provoke reaction, that's manipulation, that's toxic, that's beneath you. But then you look at stories like Catherine's, you see that the Duke literally didn't act until competition appeared, and you think, wait, so I'm supposed to just wait forever in the hopes he spontaneously gets brave. This is the paradox nobody addresses honestly. Sometimes people need a wake-up call, a trace of threat that breaks through their paralysis. But there's a razor-thin line between inspiring healthy action and creating toxic possession, between being chosen out of genuine recognition of your value and being claimed out of ego-driven fear of loss. Most relationship advice either tells you to never use jealousy under any circumstances, or tells you to constantly play games and manipulate. Both extremes are wrong, and both leave you confused about what actually works in real human psychology. So here's what we're going to do in this deep dive, and I promise you, this isn't going to be some surface-level, just-be-yourself garbage advice that helps nobody. We're going to decode exactly what happened between the Duke and Catherine, the psychology behind every choice they made, the codes of masculine paralysis and feminine power, and most importantly, how to recognize whether you're in a situation like Catherine's, waiting for someone who will eventually break through, or whether you're wasting your time on someone who's never going to choose you. We're talking about the hidden truth of why powerful men freeze around women they actually want, the dangerous chemistry of triangulation, and when it crosses from strategy into toxicity. What Sufficiently Dance With Me actually reveals about masculine declaration and the line between romantic, decisiveness, and controlling behavior. Why the perfect dance, the cinematic moment, means absolutely nothing if it's not followed by consistent, daily action. And critically, how to know if you should keep waiting or if you need to walk away before you waste years on someone who's just enjoying your attention without ever intending to commit. This is a fictional story, yes, set in a time of dukes and ballrooms that doesn't exist in your daily reality. But the psychology is timeless. The patterns are identical to what's happening in your life right now. And understanding these dynamics gives you power, real power, to make informed choices instead of just hoping and guessing and interpreting traces that might mean nothing. By the end of this, you're going to understand male psychology at a level most women never reach. You're going to recognize patterns that have been forbidden to discuss openly, and you're going to have practical tools to determine whether the man in your life is a duke waiting to break through or just someone enjoying attention he never intends to act on. So let's dive into this mystery. Let's uncover the revelations hidden in every choice these characters made. And let's figure out exactly what this means for your actual love life, starting with the most counterintuitive truth of all. Sometimes the man who seems least interested is actually the one who cares the most. Here's something most people don't understand about powerful men, and it's gonna sound completely backwards at first. The Duke, with all his authority and control over estates, servants, and social circles, stood frozen for months while watching Catherine from afar. Now, you'd think a man who commands respect everywhere he goes would simply walk up and claim what he wants. Right? Wrong. See? There's a hidden enigma in masculine psychology that nobody talks about, a sort of concealed pattern that repeats itself through centuries. When a man who's used to controlling everything suddenly finds someone who makes him feel out of control, something fascinating happens. He doesn't charge forward like you'd expect. He actually retreats into silence, observing from the shadows, calculating every possible move like a chess master who's terrified of losing his queen. It's not weakness, it's actually the opposite. And understanding this mystery changes everything you thought you knew about attraction. Think about it this way. Throughout history, dukes and powerful figures built their entire identity around one core principle: control equals survival. They'd wake up knowing exactly which decisions to make, which alliances to forge, which codes of conduct to follow in society's intricate dance. Their reputation wasn't just important, it was everything, the foundation upon which their power rested. Now imagine throwing a woman into that equation, someone who makes their heart race, someone who represents something forbidden in its intensity, something they can't control or predict. Suddenly, that carefully constructed identity starts crumbling. The trace of vulnerability appears, and for a man who's never allowed himself to be vulnerable, that feeling resembles terror more than excitement. He's standing at the edge of a cliff, wanting to jump, but knowing that once he does, there's no going back to the safety of solid ground. Here's where the psychology gets really interesting, and this applies just as much today as it did centuries ago. Powerful men, whether they're dukes or modern executives, build their self-worth around competence and decisiveness. They're the ones who solve problems, who don't hesitate, who act with certainty. But love, real love, doesn't follow those rules at all. There's no strategy guide, no guaranteed outcome, no way to maintain complete control while simultaneously surrendering to another person. So what happens? They experience what psychologists call paralysis by analysis, getting lost in overthinking every possible scenario. What if I approach her and she rejects me? What if I'm not interesting enough once she knows the real me? What if this intense feeling I have isn't reciprocated? Each question becomes another layer of hesitation, another reason to wait just a bit longer until conditions are perfect, which, of course, they never are. Now, let's talk about something that'll probably surprise you. The conspiracy of silence that happens when deep attraction meets deep fear. Catherine probably looked at the Duke's distance and interpreted it as disinterest, maybe even disdain. She couldn't see the internal conflict raging inside him every single time he was near her. Women throughout history have made this exact mistake, assuming that lack of action equals lack of feeling. But here's the revelation that changes the game entirely. The stronger his feelings, often the stronger his paralysis. It's completely counterintuitive, which is why most people miss it entirely. A man who sees you as casual fun, he'll approach without hesitation because there's nothing at stake. But a man who sees you as someone who could actually matter, someone who could potentially break through all his defenses, that man becomes a statue, frozen by the weight of what you represent. Let's bring this into modern context with concrete examples, because understanding theory without application is useless. Picture a senior executive, respected by everyone in the boardroom, makes million-dollar decisions without breaking a sweat. Yet when it comes to the woman in accounting who makes his hands shake, he can't even manage to invite her for coffee. Or consider the confident attorney who argues cases in front of judges, but can't tell his childhood friend that he's been in love with her for years. There's the entrepreneur who built his business from nothing, yet watches his employees' Instagram stories like it's his full-time job, too terrified to send a simple, "Hey, want to grab dinner?" message. These aren't weak men. They're men who've recognized something forbidden in their feelings, something that threatens the careful control they've maintained over their emotional lives, and that recognition paralyzes them completely. The secret that unlocks this entire pattern is understanding what control means to masculine identity. From boyhood, men are taught that emotions are hidden territories, dangerous zones to be managed and suppressed rather than explored and expressed. Society hands them a specific code. Be strong, be decisive, don't show weakness, don't risk rejection, maintain your dignity at all costs. By the time they reach adulthood, especially if they've achieved power or status, this programming runs deep. So when genuine, vulnerable attraction appears, it feels like a conflict between who they've been taught to be and who they actually are underneath all that armor. The Duke wasn't playing games with Catherine. He was genuinely struggling with centuries of conditioning that told him vulnerability equals weakness, even though his heart was screaming the opposite message. Here's something that'll shift your entire perspective on those confusing situations you've probably experienced. That guy who stares at you across the room but never approaches? That friend who gets weird when you mention dating other people but won't make a move himself? That colleague who finds excuses to talk to you daily but never asks you out? They're all exhibiting the same pattern the Duke showed with Catherine. It's not that you're not attractive enough, or interesting enough, actually. It's often the opposite. You're too attractive, too interesting, too potentially important, and that terrifies them. The trace of their interest shows up in stolen glances, in the way conversation flows differently with you than with others, in subtle jealousy when competitors appear. But translating that interest into action requires a level of vulnerability they haven't accessed yet, maybe haven't accessed ever. The really fascinating part, and this is where we start understanding why Catherine's story unfolds the way it does, is what finally breaks through that paralysis. It's rarely time or patience or perfect conditions. What shatters that silence, what forces action despite terror, is usually threat, the disappearance of opportunity, the sudden revelation that staying frozen means losing everything. The Duke watched Catherine for months in relative comfort, his paralysis sustainable, as long as she remained in his orbit, accessible yet unclaimed. But the moment another man entered the picture, The moment Earl Henry started showing clear interest, and Catherine responded with what looked like reciprocation, everything changed. Suddenly, staying silent wasn't safe anymore. It was the most dangerous choice of all. That's when we see powerful men finally move, not because they've conquered their fear, but because losing her has become more terrifying than risking rejection. And that shift creates revelations that nobody saw coming. There's a secret about feminine power that's been whispered through ballrooms and drawing rooms for centuries, something that feels almost forbidden to discuss openly because it reveals a darker side of attraction dynamics. Catherine didn't accidentally catch the attention of Earl Henry while the Duke watched from the shadows. No, there was something far more calculated happening beneath the surface of those elegant social gatherings. Women throughout history have discovered, sometimes consciously and sometimes instinctively, that the fastest way to move a paralyzed man is to introduce competition, to create what psychologists now call triangulation. It's not about cruelty or manipulation in the traditional sense, it's about something much more primal and, honestly, much more human. When you've spent months feeling invisible, despite knowing someone's interested, when you've waited patiently while getting nothing, but silence and distant glances, something inside you starts asking dangerous questions. Do I even matter? Am I worth fighting for? Does anyone actually see my value? And that's when the enigma of triangulation enters the story. Not as a villain, but as a desperate attempt to answer those questions. Let's decode what's really happening psychologically here, because understanding the codes beneath the surface changes everything. Catherine wasn't testing whether the Duke liked her. Deep down, she probably already knew that. What she was testing was whether she still had power in a situation where she'd felt powerless for months. Think about it. She'd been the observed, the waited for, the one left in mystery about his true intentions. Every social gathering became a strange torture, where she could feel his eyes on her, but never his actions toward her. That kind of dynamic, being wanted but not claimed, desired but not pursued, creates a specific type of emotional wound. It whispers that maybe you're not quite enough, not quite worth the risk, not quite valuable enough to inspire action. So when Earl Henry appeared with clear interest and straightforward pursuit, he offered something intoxicating: proof of value, immediate revelation that yes, someone finds her worth the effort of actual courtship. Now here's where this gets psychologically fascinating and a bit concealed in its complexity. Triangulation works on a biological level that most people don't fully understand. Men are wired, through centuries of evolution, to respond to competition in mate selection. It's called sperm competition theory in evolutionary psychology. And while that sounds clinical and unromantic, it explains why introducing a rival can transform a passive observer into an active pursuer almost overnight. When Earl Henry started showing interest in Catherine, something primal activated in the Duke's brain. An ancient code that screams, "Another male is trying to claim what you want. Act now, or lose her forever." It's not about ownership in a healthy dynamic. It's about scarcity and value recognition. If another high-status male sees value in Catherine, then her worth is socially validated, confirmed by external trace that she's not just attractive to the Duke alone, but desirable in the broader marketplace of courtship. But here's the conflict that nobody talks about honestly enough. This strategy is incredibly effective and incredibly dangerous simultaneously. Catherine's acceptance of Earl Henry's attention did exactly what perhaps some hidden part of her hoped it would. It shattered the Duke's comfortable paralysis. Yet that breaking often comes with consequences that echo far beyond the initial revelation. When you inspire action through jealousy rather than through genuine readiness, you're essentially lighting a fire under someone, and fires don't always burn in controlled, romantic ways. Sometimes what you ignite isn't love, it's possessiveness. Sometimes what you activate isn't mature commitment, it's fear-based reaction. The Duke's eventual declaration, his "enough, dance with me," carried power and decisiveness. Yes, but was it rooted in genuine readiness or in panic at potential loss? That distinction matters enormously for what comes after, for the foundation you're building your entire future relationship upon. Let's bring this into modern territory with brutal honesty, because theory without application teaches nothing. Every woman reading this has probably either used this strategy or been tempted to use it. You post that strategically casual photo with another guy, making sure it hits your stories at prime viewing time. You mention, seemingly innocent, that someone asked you out and you're thinking about it. You accept invitations from guys you're not really interested in, partly for genuine openness to possibilities, but partly, let's be honest, hoping that he sees and finally reacts. And it often works. That's the mystery of it. That guy who's been taking it slow suddenly wants to define the relationship. That friend who's been in the ambiguous zone suddenly gets jealous and territorial. But here's what happens next, the part that gets lost in the temporary victory of finally getting his attention. You've now established a pattern, a conspiracy of sorts where attention comes through threat rather than through inherent value, and that pattern tends to repeat itself throughout the relationship. The really dangerous secret about triangulation is how it feeds on low self-worth while pretending to solve it. When Catherine felt compelled to use Earl Henry's interest to provoke the Duke, what she was really saying underneath all the social maneuvering was, "I need external proof that I'm valuable because I don't quite believe it myself." That's the hidden truth nobody wants to admit. Women with deep, unshakable sense of their own worth rarely employ triangulation because they don't need to. They simply move on when interest isn't matched with action. They don't wait months in silence, hoping someone will finally see their value. They know their value exists independent of whether any particular man recognizes it. But when you're lost in insecurity, when months of being watched but not claimed have eroded your confidence, triangulation becomes this tempting drug that promises instant validation. And like most drugs, it works beautifully in the short term while creating dependency and complications in the long term. Here's the practical wisdom that centuries of these dynamics have taught us. There's a code for knowing when you're entering dangerous territory with triangulation. Ask yourself these questions with brutal honesty. Are you introducing competition because you genuinely like multiple people and want to explore options? Or are you doing it specifically to provoke a reaction from one particular person? If it's the latter, you're playing with forbidden fire. Second question. If he does react, will you feel secure in his interest? Or will you always wonder if he only wanted you because someone else did? That doubt becomes a trace that poisons relationships from the inside out. Third, are you okay with potentially losing him entirely? Because mature, secure men often recognize manipulation and simply walk away rather than compete. They're not playing games. They're looking for genuine connection. And triangulation reveals that you might not be ready for that level of authenticity yet. The truth that connects all of this, the revelation that helps us understand both Catherine's choice and the Duke's eventual explosive reaction, is that triangulation exists in that morally gray space where desperation meets strategy. It's not pure manipulation like some would claim, because genuine feelings and genuine hurt fuel it. But it's also not innocent exploration of options, because there's specific intent to provoke underneath the surface. What makes Catherine's story so compelling, and what we'll see unfold in consequences she couldn't fully predict, is that this strategy worked. It broke through the Duke's paralysis completely. But when you shatter someone's control through fear of loss Rather than through natural progression of mutual readiness, what emerges from those shards isn't always the fairy tale you imagined. Sometimes it's something far more intense, far more complicated, and far more concealed in its mixture of passion and possession than anyone bargained for. There's a single word that can change the entire trajectory of a relationship, and most people completely miss its significance when they hear it. Enough. In English, sufficiently. When the Duke finally crossed that ballroom floor, cutting through crowds and conversations, and said those words to Catherine, "Sufficiently. Dance with me," he wasn't just asking for a dance. He was drawing a line in the sand after months of silence, making a declaration that contained layers of mystery most observers couldn't decode. That word, sufficiently, carried the weight of every ignored glance, every moment of paralysis, every night he'd spent watching Earl Henry move closer to claiming what he'd been too afraid to pursue. It was simultaneously an admission of failure and a claim of territory, a revelation of vulnerability wrapped in the language of command. Understanding what makes this moment so powerful and so potentially dangerous requires us to decode the secret psychology of masculine declaration and the thin line between romantic decisiveness and toxic possession. Let's break down what's actually happening in this enigma of a statement, because every word matters enormously. Sufficiently isn't please, or would you like to, or any form of request. It's a threshold declaration, an announcement that a line has been crossed, that silence has been maintained long enough, that patience has reached its limit. The Duke isn't asking Catherine if she's ready, he's declaring that he's ready, that the time for hesitation has passed, that whatever conflict kept him frozen for months has finally been resolved by the threat of losing her entirely. This is crucial to understand. He's not controlling her. He's attempting to control a situation that spiraled beyond his comfort while he remained passive. There's a trace of self-directed anger in that word, acknowledgement that his own inaction created the conspiracy of circumstances he now has to break through. It's the verbal equivalent of a man who's been holding his breath underwater, finally breaking the surface, desperate and decisive simultaneously. Now here's where the psychology gets fascinating and where most modern interpretations get lost in oversimplification. Dance with me is grammatically a command, not a question. There's no question mark, no request for permission, no... In isolation, especially through a modern lens of consent and autonomy, this could read as red flag territory, as masculine entitlement assuming compliance. But context is everything, and the code of their specific dynamic changes the meaning entirely. The Duke had spent months demonstrating respect, maintaining distance even when desire was obvious, never pressuring or pursuing inappropriately despite having social power that could have enabled it. His declaration comes not from a pattern of disrespecting her autonomy, but from a pattern of respecting it too much, of being so paralyzed by not wanting to presume that he nearly lost her to someone who had no such hesitation. The command form isn't about controlling her. It's about finally claiming the space he should have claimed months ago, a revelation of intent that says, "I'm done hiding what I feel." What makes this moment emotionally devastating for Catherine, and for women who resonate with this dynamic, is the hidden psychology of being chosen decisively after months of ambiguity. There's something primal that activates when a man who's been hesitant suddenly becomes certain, when passivity transforms into purposeful action. Women are socialized, especially in historical contexts, but the trace remains today: to wait to be chosen, to be the prize pursued rather than the pursuer. That creates a specific fantasy, that someone will want you enough to overcome their own fears, to risk rejection publicly, to declare in front of everyone that you're worth claiming. The Duke's declaration in the middle of a crowded ballroom where rejection would be witnessed by everyone who mattered in their social sphere represents maximum vulnerability disguised as maximum confidence. He's essentially saying, I'm putting my reputation, my dignity, my carefully constructed image of control, all of it in your hands right now, and everyone's watching. But here's the critical conflict that separates romantic decisiveness from toxic control. And this distinction gets lost in so many modern attempts to recreate this dynamic. The Duke's declaration works, feels romantic rather than threatening, specifically because of everything that came before it. Months of respectful distance, clear demonstrations that he valued her beyond physical attraction, no pattern of controlling behavior, possessiveness, or disregard for her autonomy. His moment of command comes from a foundation of demonstrated respect, which completely changes its meaning. Compare that to modern situations where men use similar commanding language. You're mine. You're not talking to him anymore. We're leaving, but without that foundation. When command comes early, when it emerges from insecurity rather than from breakthrough after respectful patience, when there's no established trust, that's not romance. That's the beginning of isolation and control. The secret is recognizing which one you're experiencing. Let's get practical with modern examples because understanding theory without application helps nobody navigate their actual lives. Healthy declaration after demonstrated respect looks like this. Months of friendship where he's been supportive but not pushy. Clear mutual attraction that everyone recognizes. Then a moment where he finally says, I can't do the friend thing anymore. I have feelings for you, and I need to know if you feel the same. That's vulnerable, direct, and gives you agency to respond. Forbidden territory looks like this. 2 weeks of intense texting, he sees you laugh with another guy. Suddenly he's at your door saying, we need to talk about us, implying an us that doesn't exist yet. Getting territorial about your time and attention without having earned that place in your life. The timing matters. The foundation matters. The pattern of behavior that precedes the declaration tells you everything about whether this is love breaking through or control establishing itself. Here's a checklist that helps decode whether you're experiencing a Duke moment or a disaster, because the mystery often lies in details people ignore while caught up in intensity. First, has he demonstrated respect for your autonomy before this moment? Does he accept no on small things without sulking or pressuring? Second, is this declaration happening after months of evident but respectful interest, or is it happening in the first few weeks when intensity could just be infatuation or love bombing? Third, does the declaration happen publicly or only privately? Public declaration carries accountability. He's willing for others to witness his vulnerability. Private, especially controlling private declarations, often signal hidden intentions he doesn't want others to see. Fourth, after the declaration, does he give you space to process and respond authentically? Or does he pressure for immediate commitment? Fifth, do other areas of your life remain intact? Your friendships, hobbies, independence? Or does his declaration mark the beginning of increasing isolation? The revelation that changes how we understand the Duke's sufficiently dance with me is recognizing it as a threshold moment that could lead to either beautiful partnership or consuming possession. And the difference won't be clear until we see what comes after the dramatic declaration. Catherine faces a choice in that moment that women face constantly in modern dating. Does she reward the drama, the finally breaking through intensity, or does she require proof that his decisiveness comes from healthy readiness rather than from fear-based reaction to competition? The dance they're about to share will reveal more than physical chemistry. It'll show whether his claim of sufficiently means he's finally ready to build something real, or whether he's just reacting to the trace of threat Earl Henry represented, and that distinction will echo through everything that follows, creating either the foundation for genuine intimacy or the conspiracy of red flags disguised as romance. When two people dance together for the first time, especially when months of unspoken tension precede that first touch, what's happening on the dance floor is never just about the steps. There's a secret embedded in the act of dancing that societies throughout history have understood intuitively, which is why courtship rituals across cultures have always included some form of partnered movement. Dancing is the socially acceptable rehearsal for intimacy, the only context where bodies can be close, where one person guides and the other follows, where synchronization happens in real time with everyone watching, yet nobody able to hear the whispered revelations exchanged between partners. When the Duke and Catherine, finally, stepped onto that floor together after his declaration, they weren't just moving to music. They were testing whether the mystery and tension that had built between them could translate into actual compatibility, whether the enigma of their mutual attraction could survive the reality of physical closeness and honest conversation. Here's what makes dancing such a perfect metaphor for relationships, and why this moment carries so much psychological weight in their story. One person has to lead, but leading doesn't mean controlling. It means being confident enough in the direction to guide your partner there. The other person has to follow, but following doesn't mean passivity. It means trusting enough to let go of control while maintaining your own balance and grace. Both roles require completely different skills, yet absolute coordination. If the leader pulls too hard or moves too fast, the follower stumbles and the code breaks down. If the follower resists or tries to lead simultaneously, you get chaos instead of harmony. But when both people understand their role and trust each other enough to commit to it fully, something almost magical happens. You move as one unit, anticipating each other's movements, creating something beautiful that neither could create alone. That's not just dancing, that's the entire hidden blueprint of how healthy relationships function. The physical proximity of dancing does something psychologically fascinating that explains why it's always been considered slightly forbidden in conservative societies. You're close enough to smell each other's skin, to feel breath and heartbeat, to notice every small reaction and micro-expression that usually gets hidden behind social distance. Catherine could feel the Duke's hand on her waist, probably trembling slightly despite his outward composure, a trace of the nervousness he'd never show in any other context. He could feel whether she leaned into his guidance or maintained resistance, whether her body relaxed into trust or stayed tense with uncertainty. Every sensation becomes information, every touch a revelation about compatibility that conversation alone could never provide. This is why people throughout history have understood that how you dance together predicts how you'll navigate life together, because both require the exact same balance of leadership and surrender, strength and flexibility, individual grace, and synchronized movement. Now let's talk about what happens during their dance that reveals the conflict still simmering beneath the surface, because Catherine doesn't simply melt into his arms like some fairy tale princess. Even while moving in perfect synchronization, even while their bodies demonstrate compatibility that observers note immediately, as if they'd been partners for years, she maintains her verbal resistance. "You're being presumptuous," she tells him, testing whether his decisiveness extends to respecting her autonomy or whether it'll transform into the kind of possession that suffocates. This is crucial. This is the mystery of feminine power, even in moments of apparent surrender. She's dancing with him, following his lead physically, but verbally, she's establishing that her compliance isn't guaranteed, that his declaration earned him a dance, but not ownership, that the silence between them might be breaking, but on her terms as much as his. What makes this exchange during the dance so psychologically rich is the secret vulnerability the Duke finally allows to surface. "Behaviors I thought beneath me," he admits, referencing the months of watching her, of being lost in feelings he couldn't control, of acting in ways that contradicted his carefully constructed identity. This is the moment where his armor cracks completely, where Catherine gets to see the hidden truth beneath his commanding exterior. He's not some perfectly confident Duke who always knew what he wanted and simply chose the right moment to claim it. He's a man who's been terrified, confused, behaving in ways he didn't recognize precisely because she affected him in ways he couldn't manage or predict. That admission, "With you, I'm capable of things I don't recognize in myself," is more intimate than any physical touch, more vulnerable than any declaration of love, because it's acknowledging that she has power over him, the exact revelation his ego has been fighting against for months. The synchronization of their movement, the way they move together as if they've been dancing for years, despite this being their first partnered dance, becomes a trace of something deeper that both terrifies and thrills them. Physical compatibility, especially this immediate and undeniable, suggests other forms of compatibility that neither is quite ready to name explicitly. In historical context, and honestly still in modern dating, how bodies fit together in dancing suggests how they might fit together in far more forbidden contexts. Every observer at that ball would recognize the chemistry, the way they move as one unit, and would understand the implication these two belong together in ways that transcend social convention or rational choice. It's primal recognition disguised as social dancing, a code everyone present understands, even if nobody speaks it aloud. Let's translate this into modern dynamics, because while most people aren't literally waltzing anymore, everyone has their version of the dance, that first moment of real intimacy that tests compatibility. For some couples, it's the first time staying up all night talking, conversation flowing so naturally that hours disappear and you're shocked when sunlight appears. For others, it's the first road trip together, confined, space where you can't hide your real personality, where conflict inevitably emerges and you discover whether you can navigate disagreement with grace or whether it devolves into resentment. For some, it's the first time being physically intimate, discovering whether anticipation translates into actual chemistry or whether something fundamental is missing. Every relationship has its dance moment, that first real test where the mystery and fantasy of potential meets the reality of actual compatibility, where you discover whether the person you've built up in your imagination matches the person actually present. Here's the revelation that connects everything and sets up what must come next in their story. The dance proves physical and emotional compatibility beyond question. They move together perfectly. Conversation flows even amid tension. Vulnerability emerges naturally despite years of both suppressing it. But proving compatibility isn't the same as building a relationship. And this is where the enigma deepens, rather than resolves. They've had their cinematic moment, their perfect dance where everything aligned and everyone watching knew they belonged together. But the music has to stop eventually. The ball has to end. Tomorrow morning arrives with all its mundane reality, all its practical questions, all its complications that don't resolve themselves through one perfect dance. Earl Henry hasn't disappeared just because the Duke finally acted. Catherine's doubts about whether his decisiveness comes from genuine readiness or merely from fear of losing haven't been answered by one moment of synchronization. And the Duke's pattern of control as identity, his discomfort with the vulnerability she creates in him, those hidden patterns don't transform overnight just because they finally touched. The dance showed what could be possible, but possibility isn't the same as reality. And what comes next? the morning after the magic. That's where the real conflict begins. There's a reason fairy tales end at the ball, at the kiss, at the dramatic declaration, and it's not just narrative convenience. The real secret is that what comes after the cinematic moment is far less romantic and far more revealing than anyone wants to admit. When Catherine woke up the morning after that perfect dance, after the Duke's commanding declaration and their undeniable synchronization on the floor, she faced something that every woman who's experienced intense romantic breakthrough eventually confronts: the mystery of whether last night's intensity translates into today's reality. The ballroom magic, the perfect waltz, the vulnerable admissions whispered while moving together, all of that happened in a bubble of music and candlelight and social performance. But morning arrives with harsh sunlight that reveals every imperfection, every unresolved question, every trace of doubt that got temporarily suspended during the drama of the night before. Here's the psychological conflict that nobody prepares you for, especially after breakthrough moments of high intensity. Your brain gets flooded with dopamine, oxytocin, adrenaline during dramatic romantic events, creating a literal chemical high that feels like destiny, like everything has changed, like you've finally found what you've been searching for. But chemicals fade, usually within hours or days, and when they do, you're left with the same two people who existed before the drama, just now with heightened expectations and deeper vulnerability. Catherine expected, probably hoped, that the Duke would show up at her door first thing in the morning, that his decisiveness from the night before would continue into courtship, that left no room for silence or doubt. Instead, what she got was something far more complicated and far more realistic. A man who made a bold move in public, but now has to figure out how to follow through in private, without the adrenaline of competition, without the audience of society watching. The story reveals something crucial here that applies universally. The Duke's courtship after the declaration becomes daily, consistent, but not explosive. Walks in the park every single day, conversations that deepen gradually, a building of intimacy through repetition rather than through dramatic gestures. And here's the enigma that frustrates and confuses women constantly in modern dating. This slower, steadier approach is actually the healthier pattern, but it feels boring and uncertain compared to the intensity of the breakthrough moment. It's like the difference between fireworks and a steady flame. Fireworks are spectacular and memorable, but they burn out in seconds, while a steady flame might seem less exciting, but it's what actually keeps you warm through winter. The revelation that changes everything is understanding that if you want a relationship that lasts years, you need to be able to sustain connection during the mundane, not just during the dramatic. Let's decode the code of what healthy post-declaration courtship actually looks like, because most people have no template for this. After intense breakthrough, secure attachment looks like consistency without desperation. The Duke shows up every day for walks, but he's not smothering Catherine with constant attention or demanding immediate commitment. He's giving her space to process, to decide, to observe whether his actions match his words over time. Healthy courtship means vulnerability that increases gradually, not dumping every insecurity and fear in the first week. It means learning each other's real personalities, the parts that aren't polished for public performance, the habits and quirks and annoying traits that everyone has once you spend enough unglamorous time together. It means discovering whether you actually like each other beyond the attraction and chemistry. Because desire without genuine friendship creates relationships that burn hot and fast, then collapse into disappearance once the novelty fades. But here's where Catherine's story gets more complicated, introducing the conflict that modern dating mirrors constantly: Earl Henry doesn't disappear just because the Duke finally acted. He comes back with an invitation to the theater, maintaining his pursuit, representing the path not taken and all its appealing simplicity. This is the psychological torture of choice, especially when the choice isn't between good and bad, but between two genuinely appealing options. Earl Henry represents easier connection, lighter energy, less intensity, and therefore less potential pain. The Duke represents deeper compatibility, but also deeper vulnerability. Higher stakes, more complicated emotions, the hidden terror of how much it would hurt if this doesn't work out. Every woman has faced some version of this. The guy who makes your heart race versus the guy who makes you feel comfortable. The complicated, intense connection versus the simple, pleasant one. Here's the secret about daily courtship that reveals character far more than dramatic moments ever could. Catherine gets to see the Duke in contexts that have nothing to do with competition or performance. Contexts where his true personality emerges without adrenaline disguising it. Is he kind to servants? People who have no social power and can't benefit him? Does he listen when she talks about things that don't interest him? Or does he redirect conversation back to his preferences? Does he respect her no on small things, like when she's tired and wants to end a walk early? Or does he pressure and negotiate every boundary? These traces of character, revealed in mundane daily interaction, tell you far more about whether someone will be a good partner than any dramatic declaration or perfect dance ever could. The real him, not the performing him, shows up in the boring Tuesday afternoon conversations. The Duke's admission during this period reveals the central mystery of his entire character. I'm austere. That won't change. This is profound honesty that most people don't offer until months or years in, when patterns are already established and changing course feels impossible. He's essentially saying, this is who I am at baseline, beyond the drama, beyond the intensity of pursuing you. I'm not naturally warm or effusive or emotionally expressive. I'm serious, controlled, sometimes cold. In effect, even when I feel deeply. This gives Catherine and gives us the crucial revelation needed to make informed choices. Love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections you can accept, whose baseline personality doesn't require them to fundamentally change who they are to make you happy. Can Catherine love an austere man? Can she find fulfillment with someone whose emotional expression will always be more muted than his intensity during courtship suggested? Here's the practical wisdom that centuries of courtship patterns have crystallized into. Relationships built during mountaintop experiences, crisis, drama, intense breakthrough moments. Those relationships often crumble when you descend back to valley, to normal life. Because you've bonded over intensity rather than over compatibility in mundane daily living. The couples who last decades aren't the ones with the most dramatic love stories, though drama makes better entertainment. They're the ones who discovered early that they genuinely like spending boring Tuesday evenings together. That conversation flows naturally even when nothing exciting is happening. That they want the same general lifestyle and have compatible approaches to conflict resolution. The Duke and Catherine's daily walks, their gradually deepening conversations. These aren't the exciting parts of the story, but they're the parts that actually determine whether this becomes lasting love or just memorable drama. And looming over all of it, creating pressure that forces Catherine toward decision rather than indefinite exploration, is the reality that Earl Henry represents safety and simplicity. An escape route from the hidden terror of how vulnerable she's becoming with the Duke, and the longer she waits to choose, the more complicated and painful that choice becomes. Here's the question that haunts everyone who's ever waited for someone to finally make a move, and it's a question that carries genuine mystery, because the answer isn't always obvious, even to the people living it. How do you know if you're Catherine, waiting for a duke who's genuinely paralyzed by deep feelings and will eventually break through, versus being stuck in an endless loop with someone who enjoys your attention but will never actually choose you? This enigma destroys more time, energy, and emotional well-being than almost any other dating confusion, because hope is incredibly powerful, and waiting always feels justified when you can point to traces of interest, moments where he seemed to care, glances that suggested something deeper. But here's the brutal revelation that needs to be said clearly. Sometimes people enjoy the comfort and ego boost of your attention without ever intending to commit. And the silence you're interpreting as hesitation is actually just disinterest, wrapped in politeness. Let's establish the code for recognizing the difference, because this matters enormously for protecting your time and heart. Real interest, the kind the Duke had for Catherine, shows specific patterns even during the waiting period. There's visible progression month to month, even if slow, conversations deepen, time together increases, future references start appearing naturally in discussion, emotional vulnerability gradually increases. There are traces everywhere that something is building, that you're not static but moving toward something even if the pace frustrates you. Contrast that with situationships where you're having the exact same surface-level conversations 6 months in as you were having in month 1, where nothing ever deepens or progresses, where he's perfectly comfortable keeping everything exactly as it is indefinitely. The secret is that men who genuinely want you, even when they're scared, cannot help but move closer over time, like gravity pulling them in. Men who are just enjoying attention actively maintain distance while keeping you engaged enough not to leave. Here's where we need brutal honesty, the kind that might hurt but ultimately protects you from wasting years. The hidden truth about masculine interest. When a man truly wants a woman, genuinely sees her as potential partner, his behavior shows clear differentiation from how he treats others. He doesn't have to announce it explicitly, but everyone around can sense it. Friends notice, family picks up on it. Other women recognize when a man is genuinely focused on someone specific. There's special attention, prioritization of her time, protectiveness that emerges naturally, not possessively, an obvious investment of energy and thought into making her happy. The Duke, despite his paralysis about declaring himself, showed all these codes. Everyone at those balls knew he watched Catherine differently than he observed other women. His entire body language shifted when she entered a room. He positioned himself to be near her, even when not directly interacting. That's real interest, leaving traces that can't be hidden. Now contrast that with the conflict of ambiguous situations most modern women face, where you're analyzing breadcrumbs of attention, trying to build them into proof of interest. He texts sometimes, but disappears for days without explanation. He seems interested when you're together, but makes no effort to actually get together regularly. He says vague things about seeing where this goes, but never commits to anything concrete. He treats you exactly the same as his other friends. No differentiation, no special status, leaving you constantly uncertain whether you're reading too much into normal friendliness. Here's the revelation you need. If you're constantly confused about whether he likes you, he doesn't like you enough. Real interest isn't subtle. Real investment doesn't leave you guessing. The Duke was paralyzed about making a move, yes, but Catherine never doubted that he was interested. His interest was obvious to everyone, including her. What was uncertain was whether he'd ever act on it. Let's get practical with a checklist that cuts through the mystery and gives you clarity, brutal clarity that might hurt, but will save you time. Answer these honestly. In the past month, has there been visible progression toward more intimacy, deeper conversation, more time together, or future planning? If no, That's a red flag. Does he treat you noticeably different from how he treats other women? Special attention, protectiveness, prioritization? If no, you're not special to him regardless of what he says. Has he shown genuine vulnerability with you, sharing fears or insecurities or past pain? Or does conversation stay perpetually surface level? If surface, he's not building real intimacy. When other men show interest in you, does he react with any discomfort, or does he seem completely unbothered? If unbothered, he doesn't fear losing you. Finally, the killer question. Is your life on hold waiting for him to be ready? Or are you actively living, dating others, pursuing goals independent of whether he ever acts? The secret that changes everything is understanding the opportunity cost of waiting. Every month you spend waiting for someone who might never choose you is a month you're not available for someone who would choose you immediately and enthusiastically. Catherine waited months for the Duke, yes, but critically, she also remained open to Earl Henry. She wasn't frozen in silence, putting her entire life on pause. She was living, engaging, considering other options, which is precisely what created the pressure that forced the Duke's breakthrough. If she'd just waited passively, staying home, hoping he'd eventually act, she might still be waiting. The paradox is that making yourself unavailable, genuinely unavailable, not playing games, often reveals truth faster than any amount of patient waiting. Men who genuinely want you will panic and act when faced with losing you. Men who were just enjoying attention will let you go and feel relieved they don't have to keep managing your expectations. Here's a framework that provides codes for the decision you need to make. Set an internal deadline. Don't announce it. Just decide privately. I'll give this until X date, and if there's no progression by then, I'm moving on completely. During that time, actually live your life. Date other people. Pursue your goals. Don't put anything on hold. Watch for progression, not perfection. You're not expecting a proposal, just visible movement toward deeper connection. And here's the critical part. When your deadline arrives, honor it regardless of whether he's given you fresh breadcrumbs of attention. This protects you from the lost cycle, where you keep extending deadlines forever, because he occasionally throws you just enough attention to revive hope. The Duke got months from Catherine, but those months had an organic endpoint: Earl Henry's increasing pursuit and her own growing need for clarity about her future. She wasn't willing to wait indefinitely, and neither should you be. The painful revelation that every woman who's waited too long eventually learns is this: the right person might take time to be ready for relationship, but they won't take years, and they won't leave you in mystery about their interest level. A man who wants you makes his interest clear, even if timing isn't perfect. He communicates, he maintains connection, he shows through consistent behavior that you matter to him even before official commitment. A man who's stringing you along keeps everything vague, doesn't commit, but doesn't release you either. Enjoys the benefits of your attention without the responsibility of actual relationship. The hidden truth is that confusion itself is the answer. When you're genuinely confused about whether someone wants you, confused for months, not just days, that prolonged confusion means no, because yes feels clear, even when it's complicated. Yes shows up in consistent behavior over time. Yes might be scared or slow, but it's never perpetually ambiguous. And understanding this code, really internalizing it, saves you from the disappearance of years you can't get back spent waiting for someone who was never going to choose you, freeing you to find someone who doesn't need months or years to recognize your value because they see it immediately and act accordingly. So here we are, at the end of Catherine and the Duke's story, but really, we're at the beginning of yours, because everything we just unpacked, every secret revealed, every code decoded, every mystery solved. None of it matters unless you actually do something with this knowledge. You can watch this video, nod along, feel that rush of recognition when something resonates, and then close it and go right back to the same patterns that have been keeping you stuck. Or you can take what you've learned here and let it fundamentally shift how you see your own situation, how you interpret the silence, how you recognize the difference between someone who's genuinely interested but scared versus someone who's just enjoying your attention without ever planning to commit. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question instead of brushing past it. Right now, in your actual life, are you Catherine waiting for a duke who will eventually break through? Or are you stuck in an endless loop with someone who's never going to choose you? Someone who's perfectly comfortable keeping you in mystery indefinitely because your attention feeds their ego without requiring them to risk anything real? Be brutally honest with yourself. Has there been visible progression in the last month, the last 3 months? Or are you having the exact same conversations, the same level of ambiguity, the same traces of interest that never materialize into actual commitment? Because here's the revelation you might not want to hear, but desperately need. Confusion that lasts months isn't romantic tension. It's disrespect of your time disguised as complexity. Here's what I want you to do. Like actually do, not just think about doing. If you're waiting for someone right now, set an internal deadline. Don't announce it, don't tell him, just decide privately. I'm giving this until X date, and if there's no clear progression by then, no deepening of connection, no movement toward actual commitment, I'm done. And critically, during that waiting period, actually live your life. Don't put everything on hold. Date other people. Pursue your goals. Invest in friendships. Let yourself be seen and appreciated by people who don't need months of internal conflict to recognize your value. Because here's what happens when you do this. Men who genuinely want you will panic and act when they realize you're not waiting forever. And men who were just enjoying the comfort of your attention will let you go, revealing that you were never in a real love story. You were just a supporting character in their ego maintenance routine. Now, let me ask you something else, and this one might sting a bit. Have you ever used triangulation, bringing in competition or threat to try to force someone's hand? Have you posted that strategic photo? Mentioned another guy's interest? Accepted dates specifically hoping he would see and finally react? If you have, and honestly most of us have at some point, I'm not here to judge you, but I need you to ask yourself, did it work long-term, or did it just create a relationship built on insecurity and possessiveness rather than genuine readiness? Because the secret about using jealousy as strategy is that it reveals character. Secure, mature men often recognize manipulation and simply walk away. Insecure men react with possessive intensity that feels like passion, but is actually just fear of loss. Which one did you attract, and is that really what you want, building the foundation of your relationship? Here's the practical action I want you to take right now, today, before you move on to the next video or scroll to the next distraction. Look at your current situation with completely honest eyes. Does the person you're interested in treat you noticeably different from others? Do they show consistent traces of special attention, prioritization, investment? Or are you interpreting general kindness as specific interest because you want it to be true? Write it down, 3 concrete examples of progression in the last month. Not vague feelings or hopeful interpretations, but actual behavioral changes that show movement toward deeper connection. If you struggle to find 3 real examples, that's your answer. That's the revelation telling you it's time to redirect your energy towards someone who doesn't leave you guessing. And here's the question that separates people who transform their love lives from people who stay stuck in the same painful patterns forever. Are you willing to walk away from potential, from hope, from someone you've invested time in, if they're not matching your investment with consistent action? Because Catherine had that willingness. She wasn't frozen, waiting for the Duke. She was engaging with Earl Henry. She was living her life. She was prepared to choose differently if the Duke never broke through his paralysis. That willingness, that code of self-respect that says, "I'm not waiting indefinitely for anyone," that's actually what inspired his action. Men can sense when you're truly prepared to move on versus when you're bluffing, when you'll accept breadcrumbs forever because you're too invested to walk away. So here's my challenge to you, and I want you to actually commit to this. For the next 30 days, act like someone who knows their value doesn't depend on whether any specific person recognizes it. Stop overanalyzing every text, every glance, every ambiguous interaction. Stop putting your life on hold, waiting for someone to be ready. Start saying yes to opportunities that have nothing to do with your love life. Invest in yourself with the same energy you've been investing in trying to decode someone else's intentions. And watch what happens. Either he'll notice the shift, feel the disappearance of your focused attention, and finally act if his interest was genuine. Or he won't, which gives you the clarity you needed to stop wasting time and energy on someone who was never going to choose you anyway. The mystery of the Duke and Catherine isn't really a mystery at all once you understand the psychology. He was paralyzed by fear of vulnerability until threat of loss broke through that paralysis. She maintained her power by not waiting passively, but by continuing to live, to engage, to consider other options. Their story worked because both people were willing to risk, him finally risking rejection, her risking that he might never act, and she'd have to choose differently. That willingness to risk, to choose yourself even when it's painful, that's what separates love stories that work from situations that drain your life force while going nowhere. So let me leave you with this final thought. A year from now, you're going to be somewhere different emotionally. The only question is whether you'll be different because you stayed stuck in the same pattern, still waiting, still hoping, still interpreting silence as potential, or whether you'll be different because you took your power back, set boundaries, honored your worth, and either inspired genuine commitment or freed yourself to find someone who doesn't need years to recognize what you offer. Which version of yourself do you want to meet a year from now? If this video gave you revelations that shift your perspective, if you see your own situation more clearly now, if you understand the codes you've been missing, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and smash that notification bell, because we're going deep on psychology, on real relationship dynamics, on the hidden patterns nobody else discusses honestly. This isn't surface-level advice that sounds nice but helps nobody. This is about understanding human psychology at a level that gives you actual power to make informed choices instead of just hoping things work out. We've got so much more to uncover together, more stories, more psychology, more practical tools that actually work in real life. Don't miss what's coming next, because I promise you, we're just getting started on transforming how you understand love, attraction, and your own power in these dynamics. Now go, take action, set that deadline, live your life, and let's see who's actually worthy of your time.